I walked into the restaurant with a smile, the kind you wear when you've been looking forward to something for too long. Dinner with Deborah had been planned for weeks. No interruptions. No distractions. Just the two of us, reconnecting. But as I stepped through the door, something in the air felt off. It wasn't the usual warmth of the place. The soft hum of conversation and the clink of silverware were suddenly louder than I expected. I looked around, scanning the familiar faces, searching for her. There, in the far corner, she sat. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I almost turned around, convinced I had gotten the wrong night, that she had decided to meet someone else and had forgotten to tell me. But then I saw him. And then I saw her. His hand was resting lightly on hers, their fingers intertwined in a way that once had felt so familiar to me. The world around me slowed down, the noise receding until there was only that moment. She laughed, and he laughed with her, leaning in a little too close, eyes locked in some private joke I wasn't part of. I felt my breath catch, but there was no rush of anger, no flare of betrayal, just a hollow emptiness. The feeling was so strange that I almost didn't recognize it. She was supposed to be waiting for me. She had promised me that night. But now, in front of me, she looked so at ease, so comfortable in his presence, and I felt like an outsider in my own relationship. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't betrayal, even though I knew it should have been. It was something worse, the realization that I didn't even know her anymore. That perhaps I had never really known her at all. I stood there, still as stone, watching them. I had always believed love was a promise, an unspoken vow of loyalty, of never straying. She had once told me that loyalty was everything to her, that nothing could break the bond we shared. And yet here she was, her smile bright, her eyes soft as she gazed at him, the kind of look that was supposed to be reserved for me. A bitter thought crossed my mind, was she waiting for me to be this blind forever? Did she want me to never see this moment? Or had I simply been too foolish to notice the cracks before? My body didn't move. My feet didn't carry me forward. I was frozen, rooted to the spot as if I were watching some kind of tragic play, my own life unfolding before me, with no part to play except the one who was left behind. She hadn't seen me yet. He hadn't either. I could still walk away, slip quietly out of the restaurant, and leave them in their world. I could pretend I had never seen it. But I knew, deep down, I couldn't. Because the worst part of it all wasn't just what they were doing, but the fact that I felt nothing. No rage. No sadness. Just the bitter cold emptiness of knowing the truth. At that moment, everything I had believed in about love, loyalty, and who I was in this relationship, shattered. The ground beneath me had disappeared. The person I thought I was, the man who believed in fairness and honor and trust, felt like someone else entirely. This wasn't betrayal. This was the quiet death of everything I thought was real. I watched them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that I wasn't part of their world anymore. I was nothing more than a spectator. And in the silence of that realization, I felt nothing at all. I was 5 years old when I first understood the meaning of loss. The day my father left, I watched him pack his things with deliberate slowness, as though he were preparing for a journey, not a permanent departure. I remember standing in the doorway of the living room, gripping the frame with tiny, trembling fingers, too young to fully grasp the finality of what was happening, but old enough to feel the weight of it pressing against me. I could sense the tension in the air, the heaviness in my mother's silence. She hadn't said a word to him, not even when he turned toward the door, his suitcase in hand. When he walked out, he never looked back. I was left standing in that doorway, feeling something break inside of me. At that moment, I didn't understand the emotional intricacies of it, love, loss, trust. But I did understand abandonment. I learned it in the most primal way, from the man who was supposed to be my protector and guide. My father wasn't just leaving my mother. He was leaving me. I had never seen her cry before, but that day, she stood by the window with her back to me, staring out at the empty driveway. She never spoke of him again. She didn't need to. Every moment after that was shaped by his absence. As I grew, I saw how it affected my mother. She never let anyone close again. She poured herself into her work, rarely dating, rarely engaging in anything that might remind her of the man who had betrayed her trust. She told me once, years later, when I was old enough to understand, that she had learned to never need anyone, because the one she trusted had left her. I didn't fully get it then, but I understood that the love she had given to my father had been her undoing, and she had no intention of ever repeating that mistake. From that point on, I was raised on a steady diet of lessons about strength. Trust no one but yourself, she would tell me. People are only as good as what they can give you. It wasn't the loving, affectionate world I thought a family should be. It wasn't a home where people could lean on each other. My mother's survival was built on independence, on never being vulnerable again. She taught me that love was fleeting, that it could disappear in the blink of an eye, and that loyalty was something to be wary of, not something to be cherished. But, despite my mother's teachings, I couldn't escape the yearning for something more. I saw the relationships of my friends, the way their parents interacted, holding hands, laughing together, sharing quiet moments of affection. It looked so easy, so natural, and I couldn't understand why my mother didn't seem to want that for herself. I wanted to believe that love wasn't just a fleeting thing. I wanted to believe that it could be constant, that it could endure. I went through the motions of childhood, of adolescence, with a quiet ache in my chest. I made friends, but I kept them at arm's length. I never let anyone get too close, always too afraid of letting them in only to have them leave, like my father had. Then I met Deborah. She was unlike anyone I had ever met. Warm. Open. She made me feel seen, in a way that no one ever had. When we first met, she was studying art at the university. I was working part-time at a bookstore, trying to get through college. We met when she came in to buy a book, one she insisted I had to read. It wasn't anything special, just an ordinary encounter, but I felt something shift in me that day. Her enthusiasm, her ability to talk about her passions without reservation, it drew me in. She made me feel like I was someone worth talking to, someone whose opinion mattered. I fell for her quickly. It was like I had finally found someone who didn't make me feel like I had to hide my broken pieces, someone who didn't expect me to be perfectly whole. Deborah's openness, her ability to love so freely, felt like a gift. But with that gift came a weight I wasn't prepared for, my own insecurities. I found myself in a battle with the ghosts of my past, the lessons my mother had instilled in me. I wanted to love her, wanted to believe that loyalty could be real, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was always one misstep away from losing it all. Still, I dove in. Deborah and I quickly became inseparable. She filled the gaps that had long existed in my life, and for a time, it felt like I had finally found the thing I had been searching for, someone to trust, someone to believe in, someone who made the pain of my childhood feel like a distant memory. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that I could have something lasting, that I could be the man I had always wanted to be, someone capable of loyalty, someone who believed in love. But as much as Deborah gave, she also took. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, cracks began to show in our relationship. It was subtle, a change in the way she spoke to me, a glance that lingered a little too long when someone else entered the room. I remember the first time I felt it, like a cold draft in the room. I couldn't pinpoint what was happening, but I knew something wasn't right. I wanted to dismiss it, tell myself it was nothing, but I couldn't. And so, I did what I had learned to do from my mother. I withdrew. I pulled back emotionally, like a switch had been flipped, and I started to protect myself in the only way I knew how, by building walls. I stopped being as open with her, stopped sharing the vulnerabilities that had once come so easily. I didn't trust her the way I had in the beginning. I didn't trust myself either. I had loved her so completely, but now there was a part of me that kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I feared the abandonment I had experienced as a child would happen again, and this time, it would destroy me. But even then, I didn't see it coming. I never imagined it would happen this way, so quietly, so completely. Deborah was everything I had longed for, but as I stood frozen in that restaurant, watching her laugh with another man, I realized how hollow my beliefs had become. Everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about trust, about love, was suddenly unrecognizable. In the end, it wasn't just her betrayal that shook me. It was the realization that I had been carrying the weight of my mother's lessons all along, and that I had never truly learned how to love freely, without fear. How could I? I had been trained to believe that no one stayed, that no one could be trusted. And now, as I watched Deborah share something with him that I had always thought was ours, I felt that same emptiness I had known as a child. Love had always been fleeting. Just like my father's departure. Just like my mother's quiet, painful silence. And now, it was slipping through my fingers once again. When I first met Deborah, it felt like fate. She had an energy about her that was impossible to ignore, this radiant warmth that seemed to fill the room the moment she entered. She was the kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one who mattered, like all the world's noise faded when she was with you. It wasn't just the way she spoke, or the way she laughed, it was how she made every moment feel alive. I was drawn to her instantly. She was vibrant, full of life, and so free. I had always thought of myself as someone who stayed in the background, trying to blend in with the world around me, never drawing too much attention. But with Deborah, I felt seen. I felt alive in a way I never had before. Our first real conversation was about books. We were both in that awkward, quiet space of a coffee shop, sitting across from each other, our eyes occasionally meeting before both of us would look away, unsure of what to say. Then she mentioned a novel, a classic that I'd read years ago, and we fell into an easy, natural rhythm, sharing thoughts about characters, plot twists, and themes. It felt like we had known each other for years, as if there was an unspoken connection between us that was somehow written in the stars. I was captivated, not just by her knowledge of literature, but by the way she made me feel important. She listened with intent, truly engaged in our conversation, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. It was strange to feel that way. Growing up, I had always been the silent observer, never quite fitting in, always measuring my worth by how much others wanted from me. But with Deborah, I felt valued for simply being who I was. She didn't want anything from me, except my presence. It felt like a promise, a soft whisper of something real, something I had longed for but never allowed myself to believe in. As we spent more time together, that connection deepened. We talked about our childhoods, about dreams and disappointments, about everything that made us who we were. Deborah was different from the people I had known before, she was open, vulnerable in a way that felt raw and refreshing. There were no walls between us, no fear of judgment. Her life had been full of joy and loss in equal measure, but she carried it all with a grace I admired. She told me about the heartbreak she had suffered. How she had once been in a relationship with someone who had betrayed her trust, and how it had taken years for her to recover. It was a part of her story that I could relate to. I understood that kind of pain all too well. But Deborah had learned to love again, and when she looked at me, there was something in her eyes that made me believe I could learn to trust, too. In the beginning, it felt perfect, she was everything I had dreamed of. The way she touched my arm casually, as though the world was ours to conquer. The way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about things that mattered to her. I was falling for her, and I didn't want to stop. I thought she was my anchor, the one I had been waiting for. But soon, I started to notice the cracks in our relationship. It was subtle at first, a moment here, a comment there. Deborah, for all her warmth, had a way of pushing my boundaries without realizing it. She would talk about her ex with an ease that unsettled me, comparing things we did to the things she'd done with him, as though she were measuring me against some version of herself I could never be. It was little things at first. She would joke about how I wasn't as adventurous as he had been, how I didn't take as many risks, how I was too cautious. It wasn't the words themselves that bothered me, it was the way they made me feel. It felt as though I could never measure up to her past, a past that seemed so much more exciting, so much more vivid than my own. She didn't mean to hurt me. She never did. But the comparison began to gnaw at me. I wanted to be her anchor, to be the one she relied on, but I wasn't sure I was who she truly wanted. She seemed to long for someone who could match the wild, carefree spirit of the man she had loved before. I remember the first time I questioned whether Deborah truly saw me for who I was. We were sitting on the couch in her apartment, a quiet evening spent reading side by side. She glanced at me, a look of contentment on her face, and said, "You know, I love being with you. But I used to go on spontaneous trips all the time, just get in the car and drive. I miss that feeling sometimes." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always been more careful with my decisions. I liked planning things, having a sense of stability. But in that moment, I realized something: she didn't just miss the spontaneity. She missed the person who had given her that freedom. She was longing for someone different, someone who wasn't bound by the same sense of caution that I carried with me. I tried to ignore the feeling that had settled in my chest, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But it wasn't just one comment. It was the subtle way she would talk about her past, the way she would mention her ex without any discomfort, as though that chapter of her life was still very much alive in her. She didn't hide it from me, and yet I could never shake the feeling that she was still comparing me to him. I started to wonder if I could ever be the man she truly wanted. I loved her, but did she love me for who I was, or for some ideal version of me she had yet to see? I had always been afraid of not being enough. I had spent my entire life building walls to protect myself from disappointment, but Deborah seemed to tear them down effortlessly. And yet, as much as I wanted to walk away, I found myself clinging to her, to the hope that we could make it work. Every time I felt that cold gnawing doubt creep in, Deborah would do something small, something tender, that reminded me of the person I had fallen in love with. A whispered word of encouragement, a glance that spoke more than any of her carefully chosen words. But beneath it all, I knew something was shifting. My need to feel accepted, to feel like I was enough, was growing louder with every passing day. I began to question whether the love Deborah offered was the kind of love I truly needed. Was it enough to simply be loved by her? Or did I need to be loved in a way that made me feel whole, not just in her eyes, but in my own? As I looked at her across the room that night at the restaurant, with him by her side, I realized something profound: this wasn't just about Deborah. It was about me. About how I had allowed myself to believe that love, true love, could fill the voids left by years of abandonment. But love, it seemed, was never as simple as I had hoped. I thought Deborah was my anchor. But maybe, in the end, I had been holding on to her to keep from drifting away, not realizing that it was I who had to learn how to stand on my own. The restaurant, once so familiar, now felt like a foreign world, a strange and empty place I no longer recognized. I had been standing there for what felt like hours, rooted to the spot, my feet glued to the floor, but I hadn't moved. I couldn't. I had walked in, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening, maybe a little laughter, some shared memories, a moment to feel the warmth of our bond again. I thought maybe this time, this dinner, would bring us back together, the us that we used to be. But everything I thought I understood about Deborah, about us, came crashing down in that instant. She was sitting at the table, her head tilted back in that way she always did when she laughed, eyes closed, mouth open, completely lost in the moment. But the laugh, it wasn't the laugh I knew. It was lighter, freer, more playful. Not the laughter I had earned, but the laughter of someone who had no care in the world, no inhibitions. She looked so happy. So content. And then there was him. I don't know when he showed up. I didn't see him come in, didn't see him approach the table. It wasn't until I saw the way he was leaning over her, their hands intertwined, that the realization hit me like a gut punch. I stood frozen, trying to piece together what was happening, my mind racing through 1,000 thoughts, none of them making any sense. He was tall, older than me, confident in a way I wasn't. And his proximity to Deborah felt wrong. It felt intimate, in a way that was foreign to me. There was a part of me that wanted to believe it was innocent. Maybe they were just old friends catching up, and maybe I was being paranoid. But then I saw him press his lips to her cheek, just lightly, a tender gesture that I had seen her give me 1,000 times. And I realized, with sickening clarity, that the tenderness between them wasn't innocent. It wasn't just a casual kiss between friends. It was something deeper, something that spoke of a closeness I hadn't known existed between them. I should have felt anger. I should have shouted, demanded answers, thrown the kind of fit that would have shaken the walls of that restaurant. But what I felt instead was a crushing, suffocating emptiness. She didn't see me. Or if she did, she didn't care. They were too caught up in their own world, in a connection I wasn't part of. In that moment, it wasn't just the betrayal of my trust that hit me, it was the realization that I had never truly been part of her world at all. I had loved her. I had trusted her with everything, poured myself into this relationship, believing in the promise we had made to each other. I thought she was my anchor, the one who could hold me steady. But now, as I watched her, I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before: she had never really loved me. She had loved the idea of me, the man who could give her security, someone to hold on to when things got rough. But when it came down to it, when it was time to truly invest, to truly be vulnerable, she had turned away. She had found someone else to fill the gaps I couldn't. And then, the final dagger. As I stood there, watching them, I saw him pull back and look at her with the kind of possessive, proud smile that I had never seen directed at me. He said something I couldn't hear, but the look on his face said it all. She leaned in, her eyes soft with affection, and kissed him. I felt my legs give out beneath me. I didn't collapse to the ground, but my body trembled, fighting the overwhelming sensation of everything I had built up for the past year crumbling away. There was no anger. There was no fury. There was just this quiet sadness, a deep, gnawing disappointment that sank into my bones. This wasn't about the physical act of her kissing him. It wasn't about the betrayal of my body. It was about something deeper, something more insidious. It was about the fact that she had never been the person I thought she was. She had never truly been mine. She had lied to me, not just with her actions, but with her words, her promises. She had made me believe in something that wasn't real. It wasn't just her either. It was him, my so-called friend. The man who had once told me that I was a good guy, that I deserved the best. The man who had known about Deborah and me. He knew everything. Or at least, I thought he did. He had been a part of my life, my inner circle, someone I trusted. And now here he was, sitting there, laughing with her like they had been together all along. Like I had never even existed in their world. How long has this been going on? Had I been the fool, the oblivious idiot who had never seen it? I remembered the times when Deborah seemed distracted, when she would get distant for no reason, when her texts would be shorter, her responses delayed. I had told myself it was nothing. I had convinced myself that my insecurities were just that, insecurities. But now, I saw them for what they were. Signals I had ignored. Red flags I had refused to acknowledge, because I wanted to believe that I mattered to her. That I was enough. But the truth was, I had never been enough for her. Not in the way she needed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run up to their table, grab her by the arm, shake her, and demand an explanation. But I couldn't. The numbness inside of me had taken hold, making my body feel like it was no longer mine to control. I just stood there, unable to move, unable to do anything except watch as the two of them continued to exist in a world that I wasn't part of. And that was the hardest part. It wasn't the betrayal itself, it wasn't the physical act of her kissing him. It was the realization that I had been living in a lie. I had trusted someone who had never truly trusted me. I had believed in a love that had always been conditional, never unconditional. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad, at least not in the way I expected to be. I was empty. Because at that moment, I understood the depth of the manipulation. It wasn't just that she had betrayed me, it was that she had done it in such a way that I hadn't even realized I had been played. I had been a fool, and that realization was the most painful thing of all. The night seemed endless, stretching out before me like an open wound. I stood there, my breath shallow, my chest tight, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted to scream. But the overwhelming numbness had settled in like a heavy fog, and everything else seemed so distant, so surreal. The people around me, the noise, the clinking of glasses, it was all too much to bear. She hadn't seen me. Deborah hadn't noticed me standing there, frozen, like a ghost, watching them, watching her, laugh together. The pain of it all, her betrayal, his smug presence, felt like something deep within my soul cracking apart. But what hurt the most wasn't the kiss. It wasn't a physical betrayal. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be blind for so long. I didn't belong here anymore. I didn't belong in their world, in this life we had built. I had been a fool, living in a lie, thinking I was part of something genuine, something real. But it was all a facade, a mirage that had disappeared the moment I saw them together. I could have charged over to their table. I could have confronted them, shouted, made a scene. Part of me wanted to make them feel the weight of what they had done, wanted to show them how much they had hurt me. But as I stood there, watching them, the anger began to melt away, leaving nothing but a cold emptiness. I realized that confrontation wasn't what I needed. What I needed, what I deserved, was to reclaim my own life. I wasn't going to let this define me. The decision wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some sudden, fiery impulse. It was quiet. It was deliberate. In the silence of the restaurant, I stepped back, my feet moving automatically as if they had a mind of their own. I walked toward the door, feeling their eyes, both Deborah's and his, never once acknowledging me as I passed them by. The door swung open with a soft click, and the cool night air hit my face. I paused on the sidewalk, standing alone in the dark, and let the silence wash over me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not Deborah. Not at him. And certainly not at myself. I had been a fool, yes. But that was the last time I would allow myself to be one. I walked down the street, my step steady and sure. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was doing, but I knew I had to leave that place, leave them, leave everything behind. Because in that moment, it wasn't just the betrayal that had to be confronted. It was the life I had allowed myself to settle into. The complacency I had felt in being with someone who never truly saw me. I had been hiding behind the notion of love, behind the idea of a relationship that was based on something that wasn't even real. When I reached my apartment, I didn't immediately go inside. Instead, I stood by the door, my hand resting on the handle, and I just breathed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in far too long: peace. I had spent so much of my life fearing abandonment, fearing betrayal. I had spent so much time holding on to a version of myself that wasn't real, a version of love that wasn't real. I had allowed myself to believe that loyalty was something to be earned from others, when all along, I should have known that it had to come from within. I had been taught that love was something that could fade, something that could betray you. But I was wrong. It wasn't love that was fickle, it was the way I had allowed myself to cling to the wrong kind of love. And now, I was free. I didn't call Deborah. I didn't text. I didn't chase after her for answers. In the silence that had settled over me, I realized that no words would ever undo what had been done. She had made her choices, and so had I. But I wasn't going to chase her, and I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to beg for the love I thought I deserved. That night, I packed a bag, just a few essentials, things I could carry with me as I walked away. I didn't know where I was going, or what I would do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't stay in this place where everything felt tainted, where the shadows of betrayal hung over me like a cloud. I spent the next few weeks in a haze of quiet reflection. I traveled, though not to escape, but to find a piece of myself I had buried too long. I went to places I had always wanted to visit, small towns, quiet streets, places I had dreamed of but had always pushed aside for the sake of a relationship that wasn't what I had thought it was. I didn't talk to anyone, not at first. I didn't need to. I needed to be alone, to listen to the quiet that had once felt so foreign, so unsettling. But now, it was all I wanted. I realized that I had been living my life on someone else's terms, on Deborah's terms, on the expectations I had built for us. I had held on to a dream that wasn't mine to hold. I had allowed my self-worth to be measured by someone else's love. And in that realization, I found my own voice. When I came back home, I didn't rush into anything. I didn't go back to the places where memories lingered. I didn't call Deborah. I didn't need closure from her, because the truth I had learned was more important than anything she could say. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own worth. I had learned that love wasn't something to be chased, but something that grew within. A few months later, Deborah reached out to me. She asked to meet, to talk. I knew what she wanted. She wanted answers. She wanted to explain herself, to make me see her side. But I didn't need to hear it. I didn't need her words to heal me, because I had already healed myself. When I met her, I didn't rage. I didn't shout, or accuse, or demand apologies. I simply listened. And when the conversation came to a close, I stood up, nodded, and walked away. That was the last time I saw her. The last time I let her hold any power over me. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt free. And that freedom, quiet and deep, was the real victory. I wasn't broken anymore. I had found the courage to walk away, and in doing so, I had rediscovered the parts of me I had hidden for so long. No one could take that away from me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was whole. Finally, I was whole. And that was enough. It's strange how time changes everything. In the beginning, after I walked away, I was consumed by a quiet kind of emptiness. For weeks, I lived in that space between what had been and what might be. I wasn't angry at Deborah anymore, I wasn't angry at myself. But there was a kind of rawness I couldn't escape, a feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, as if I were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out into an unknown abyss. But over time, the edges began to soften. The numbness faded. I remember waking up one morning in a small town I had wandered into, a place I'd never been before, but somehow felt at peace in. The morning light streamed through the window, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. I had been so wrapped up in who I thought I was supposed to be in a relationship that I had forgotten who I was when I was alone. I used to define myself by the love I thought I deserved, by the person I thought I should be for others. I had believed that my worth was tied to the approval of those I loved. But the truth was, I had never really loved myself. I had clung to relationships out of fear, fear of being alone, of not being enough, of being abandoned. I had built walls around my heart to protect myself, and yet, those very walls had kept me from seeing what I truly needed. When I left Deborah, I left more than just a relationship. I left the part of me that had been afraid to stand on my own. I left the part that believed love could be a refuge from pain, when really, it had to come from within. It wasn't until I stepped away from everything that I realized how much I had neglected my own needs, my own growth. I spent the next months focusing on myself. I traveled, yes, but I also read more, worked on things that had always mattered to me, things I had put aside in the haze of loving someone else. I learned that peace didn't come from someone else's affection, it came from accepting myself as I was, flaws and all. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was already whole. I began to see relationships in a different light. I didn't need anyone to validate my existence anymore. Love wasn't about finding someone who would save me, but about finding someone who would accept me as I was. It wasn't about being the perfect partner, it was about being honest with myself and with others. The walls I had built over the years, those walls that were meant to protect me, began to fall away, slowly but surely, leaving space for something new, real connection. I was different now. Not because I had gotten revenge, or because I had confronted anyone. I didn't need any dramatic showdown or public spectacle to feel validated. What had changed was my understanding of love and self-worth. I didn't need someone else to define me. I didn't need to be anyone else but who I truly was. There were moments, of course, when the past would creep in, the flashbacks to Deborah's laughter with him, the feelings of inadequacy that still lingered like old scars. But they didn't control me anymore. They were just pieces of a story I had outgrown. The emptiness I once feared had transformed into freedom. And with that freedom came a quiet strength, a strength I had never known I possessed. I had learned to trust myself, to trust that I could weather any storm, even the ones that came from within. I had been broken, yes, but I was no longer fractured. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, until I was stronger than before. In the end, it wasn't the loss of Deborah or the betrayal that had shaped me. It was the act of reclaiming myself. I had learned to stop searching for my worth in someone else's hands, and in doing so, I had found something far more valuable, the peace that comes with knowing that I am enough, all on my own. And that, I realized, was all I ever needed.